In CSS, we have just a few ways of positioning things on a page. There aren't that many, and they are all useful, as well as having their own problems that we need to be aware of. At the top of this list is CSS columns. It's technically not a positioning system, but I still put it in here because it's still very useful, especially in editorial style layouts. So with columns, we actually set up how many columns we want and whether we want a gap and stuff like that. And what you find is that it will distribute whatever content is in here across those columns, and always even, just like a newspaper. So if I go and change this to something like lorem ipsum, it's going to just flow it down the page as well as it can. We can still see those columns in play if I turn the rules back on, but it's technically not going to work for us because we can't change the width of these first two columns to meet our needs. So option one, it's very good if you're doing some sort of editorial stuff and you don't want your register to be overly long, the length of your lines to be overly long, but it doesn't really work for positioning by itself. Below that, we have position, position absolute, position relative, all those different positioning systems. This has been around since the dawn of CSS, and it works. It works great. In order to make it work, we need a bunch of code, so we need to add position relative to the parent and a bunch of stuff to the children to make them all line up. And the real issue with this is that once we do this, once we position absolute something, it takes it out of the normal flow of the document. So the elements behind this parent block have no idea what's going on. And this content will either flow over or under the content that comes after it. It has to, because it has no way of knowing what this content is doing. So that's a very dangerous thing when you're trying to do responsive. This can quickly break out of its box and cause problems. Below that, we have inline, and the real problem with inline is that not only is your code inline, not only is your display inline, but your code has to be inline too. In fact, if I add a return here, you're going to see that this breaks, and the reason it breaks is because inline respects white space. So display inline block, inline respects white space, so a return registers as a space. Now that's not the only problem here. We can quickly back out of this, and I'm going to add some lorem to this again, just like this. And you can see that it actually pushes these other two boxes down. The reason for that is it's trying to line up with some sort of a baseline. I don't quite understand this, so getting this to all line up properly, it's going to be a bit of a bear. It's always going to be a bit of a challenge, so my advice is don't use it. It's available. You've probably never used it, because if you have, you've run into the same problems that I just showed you. Okay. Below that, we have float. For the longest time, float has been the go-to thing for layouts. If you wanted to do anything grid-like, float was the key feature of that. And it works. Again, you can float left, float right, and you need this clear fix. And for the longest time, this clear fix was very technical. We've actually shortened it up, cleaned it up. But there's a problem here too. If I go and add that lorem, you're going to see that, yes, with the clear fix, it does change that. If I comment this out, it will actually flow over the box. And this is the real challenge with float, is that A, without the clear fix, the parent has no idea what the child is doing. It's just going to flow out of the box. And B, with the clear fix, even with the clear fix, the siblings have no idea what this child element is doing. So they can never be the same height without doing something tricky like adding a CSS background to fake the height, or using some JavaScript to get this calculated height and add it to these two items. You need extra stuff in order to make this work, and that's kind of a challenge. So Yeah, let's move on. Table. Table, it's been around for a while, and it really had about 5 minutes of fame, which just wasn't enough. Table is actually very, very cool. We can add stuff in here, and it's just going to work. Everything lines up. We vertically align. We can see that if I scroll down in the code. It's very simple. We just go display table, set the width, set our children to table cell, and set it all up, and it just works. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And it gets the job done. The issue, I see two issues with this. And they're both unrelated to table itself, because display table is actually pretty awesome, I think. Issue number one is that we have this angry fear of tables because we've tried to move away from them. Ever since CSS Float became the way to lay things out, we hate using tables for anything display-like. And just putting display table in there, it probably brings back memories that make the bile rise up in your throat. The other thing that happened was that right after table became popular, Flex showed up. So these two things, Flex kind of overshadowed table and it went away very fast. So now we have Flex, and Flex is awesome. Okay, there's nothing wrong with table, but Flex gives us a lot of control in how things work. We can do stuff, we can add the content in here, and nothing's going to break. It just works brilliantly. The issue with this is in use. So with display flex, the usage is in the name, and what you'll find is a lot of people will start adding a width in here. They'll go with 25% instead of using this flex property, and nothing changes because it's doing the exact same thing. But when you add width, you're making it a fixed size, and fixed is not flex. So my advice is, if you're using width in here to get it laid out, you're probably doing it wrong. I have very strong feelings about that. You're probably doing it wrong. You should be using flex, because flex basis, which is what this number is a starting point, a strong recommendation. And then flex will change the width of that slightly, either shrinking or growing to fit the available space, which is usually what you want. So flex. That leads us to grid. Grid is the new kid, and grid is awesome. The way that grid works is it works from the outside in. All these other ones, we've had to put sizing and stuff on the children. We no longer have to do that. We add it to the parent, and the parent figures it out for us. So we have really just one declaration in here. Grid template columns, and we're using this fractional width, which means make it a piece of this. If this was 100%, I want this to be 25%, 0.25, and this to be 25%, and this to be 50. And these numbers can be anything, so if I wanted to, I could have gone with 1, and it's going to jump around for a second, and 2. And it's going to look exactly the same. So it takes the available space and distributes it across these measurements. Now the children don't center up like table and flex. That's because the children need a little bit more. But you're probably doing a little bit more to the children anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But in terms of getting grid working, this is it. We just needed, 2 lines of code. Turn grid on and set up our columns on the parent, and it does it. Now, as a final reference, we do have foundation in here. Sorry, Flexbox. We do have Flexbox. We also have foundation in here. And there are no styles. I haven't added anything. I've just used foundation's grid classes to set things up. If you are already using something like Foundation or Bootstrap, then use its grid system. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's already there. It's already available to you. So why go reinvent the wheel? There's nothing wrong with that. If If you're bringing Foundation in just to use its grid system, then I think you have a problem. You should be revisiting this and maybe looking at Grid, which works in every browser back to IE 10. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to, over the next few videos, we're going to explore Grid and make it work in IE 10, make it work really easily, and it's going to be great. I'll see you there.